I wasn't looking for it. The drawer creaked open under the weight of memory, more than wood. I had come to find a pen, one of those sleek black ones my father kept stockpiled like trophies. But my fingers brushed something cold and stiff instead, an envelope. It was thick, sealed, embossed with the golden crest of Whitmore and Sons, my father's law firm. At first, I didn't open it. I just stared at it, my breath catching in the hollow of my throat. I knew that logo. I'd grown up tracing its edges on notepads while waiting in his office, watching him sip scotch and quote Latin like it made him a king. Something in me said, "Don't," but I did. The flap gave way with a soft tear, and then the silence began to scream. It was a legal amendment, signed and notarized, removing my name from my father's will. Every asset, every account, the house on Montclair Hill, even the lake property in Vermont. It was all reassigned to the children of his second union. That was the phrase. Cold, clinical. Like I had been a clerical error, they were finally correcting. No explanation, no goodbye, just absence. My name was there once. I remember seeing it on earlier drafts, clumsily printed in capital letters, when I was still too young to understand what estate planning meant. Back then, my father had called me his first light, the daughter he held like a promise after his first marriage crumbled. I wore his last name like a shield. Now, it was gone, erased. The document trembled in my hands, though I wasn't sure if it was the paper or me. I sat down at the old mahogany dining table, once the site of birthday cakes and homework tantrums, and laid the letter flat. The room felt colder than it had moments before. Dust motes drifted through the shafts of morning light like whispers, and I could hear the soft tick of the antique clock on the mantel. A wedding photo still hung above it, my father in a black tuxedo, smiling wider than I had ever seen in real life. His new wife beside him, in a pearl-laced gown, her hand draped over his like she owned it. I never liked that picture. It always felt like a portrait of someone else's future. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page, his familiar curl, his lawyer's flourish, the same hand that once held mine across busy streets, that wrote me letters at boarding school, that taught me how to loop my L's in cursive. I pressed my thumb to it. He had chosen them, not just over me, but instead of me. I thought of the last time I saw him in person. It had been at my half-brother's birthday party. Sebastian, age 5, obsessed with trucks and trained to call me Livy, like I was the help. My father had barely looked at me that day. He was busy handing out drinks and making speeches. I left early and told myself he was just distracted. But this wasn't distraction. This was decision. Grief didn't come in sobs. It came in stillness. I couldn't cry, couldn't move. I just sat there, feeling the walls of my world shift, and groan like the foundation of an old house settling into collapse. He had known. For months he had known, and he said nothing, not even a phone call. I could hear my mother's voice echoing from years ago, after the divorce. He remakes the world to suit his guilt. Don't be surprised when you no longer fit. I had dismissed her then. I thought she was bitter, but now her words landed like prophecy. I glanced at the back door. It led to the garden my mother had abandoned when she left, the one I never learned to tend. The ivy had claimed the trellis. The roses had gone wild. Suddenly, I couldn't stay in that room. I took the paper with me and walked out into the yard. The sky was pale and indifferent above me. The wind tugged at my hair, and I wanted to scream, but I didn't know where to aim it. At my father, at myself. A single sentence pulsed through me like a heartbeat. You are nothing to him now. I sat on the edge of the stone planter and read the letter again. It didn't change. It didn't apologize. I folded it once, then twice, and pressed it into my jacket pocket like it might burn a hole through the fabric and into my chest. I didn't know what I would do next. Not yet. But something inside me cracked. Not like glass shattering, but like soil splitting before something begins to grow. I was 16 the first time the locks changed. It was the day after the final court hearing. Custody, division of property, everything. My mother had packed her life into boxes that barely filled the back of a borrowed van. She didn't cry, not in front of me. She just kissed my forehead and said, "Don't become a shadow in your own home." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was being dramatic. I thought if I stayed with him, if I kept smiling, kept studying, kept being good, he would need me. He would love me again. But even shadows have outlines. I would soon learn I didn't. My father remarried within the year. Her name was Elise, blonde, soft-spoken, with the kind of laugh that made men lean closer. She moved into the estate like she'd always belonged there, redecorated everything in creams and pale golds, had my old bedroom repainted in pastel blue for the nursery. I moved to the guest suite, farther down the hall, farther from him, a task in first. I thought it was temporary, a phase. I told myself he was distracted. He was happy again. Wasn't that good? I didn't need much. Just a smile, a conversation, a seat next to him at dinner that wasn't immediately taken by Elise, or one of the babies she soon gave him. But dinners became quieter, birthdays smaller. His eyes rarely met mine anymore. I remember coming home from college for a weekend, back when I still had a scholarship offer waiting, and finding my piano missing from the den. It had been sold, Elise said sweetly, to make room for a proper play area. I nodded, pretended it didn't hurt, pretended I hadn't composed my first song on that piano the year my parents split. I didn't go back to school. I stayed, got a part-time job nearby, told everyone it was my choice. My friends didn't believe me. They watched me shrink and fade and turn polite. One by one, they drifted away, tired of trying to pull me out when I insisted I was fine. Even my mother, after a while, stopped calling regularly. She never said it outright, but I knew she hated that I'd chosen to stay. I told her once, during a rare lunch together at a small cafe near her rented bungalow, "He's not all bad, Mom. He's just lost." She looked at me for a long time and then said, "And what are you, Olivia?" "His lighthouse." It hurt, but I smiled anyway. I kept smiling for years. I smiled when Elise handed me the guest list for her second baby shower and asked if I could run out to pick up the cake. I smiled when my father handed me the firm's Christmas card to stamp, even though my name was nowhere on it. I smiled when they left for a family trip to Paris and didn't realize until they were already on the plane that they hadn't invited me. I became very good at smiling, very bad at feeling. The house grew bigger and colder. So did he. I think I started dressing quieter, moving quieter. I didn't want to disrupt the perfect picture they were building. Their new legacy, as he called it in one of his speeches at a business dinner. I had been there, wearing the black dress Elise picked for me. I clapped along with the rest when he toasted to the future, to new beginnings. No one toasted to the past. No one toasted to me. There were moments, brief ones, when I saw a flicker of the man who used to wake me up with pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, or who sat through every terrible school play with eyes bright and proud. But those moments vanished too quickly, like mirages. I kept a shoebox under my bed, filled with old birthday cards he used to write me, back when he called me his little hurricane. I would read them some nights when the silence got too loud. Don't let the world dim your fire. One card had said, I still don't know when he decided to become the one holding the extinguisher. There were signs, of course. Elise's quiet comments. The way she'd introduce me as James's daughter from before. The way my father stopped correcting her. I once overheard him on the phone saying, she's still here, yes, but she'll find her own way eventually. Like, I was a phase, a guest, a lingering obligation. But even then, I stayed. I told myself loyalty meant something. That if I proved myself indispensable, if I just waited a little longer, he would remember who I was to him, that he'd see me again, not as a remnant, not as a duty, but as Olivia, his first light. I think now that hope was the most dangerous part, because it kept me still, kept me silent, kept me close to a fire that was never warm. Sometimes I'd catch Elise looking at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. Her children, my half-siblings, grew up with no memory of me holding them as babies. No clue that I kept track of their milestones, bought them birthday presents they never thanked me for. I became the furniture, useful, replaceable, until I wasn't useful anymore. That letter I found last week didn't come out of nowhere. It was the end of a long, slow erasure. And the truth is, I let it happen. I let it happen because I thought love meant endurance. That loyalty could rewrite a heart already claimed by someone else. I was wrong. And now, as I sit in my mother's garden, surrounded by weeds and wild vines, I realize I was never building a bridge back to my father. I was standing in the wreckage, pretending it could be home. I hadn't been inside the house in nearly 6 months. Funny, how quickly something you once called home can start to feel like a stranger's skin. The hedges were trimmed too neatly. The front door, once burgundy with a brass knocker shaped like a lion, had been replaced with a sleek grey slab. Modern, minimal, lifeless. Like Elise, I stood at the threshold for a full minute, my hand hovering above the bell. My reflection in the side window startled me. Pale, eyes too wide, like a ghost not yet ready to haunt. The door opened before I rang. Olivia, Elise said, her voice laced with syrup. James is in his study. She stepped aside without waiting for a reply, as though I were a contractor, not the daughter of the man who once carried me on his shoulders through autumn carnivals. I walked through the house on autopilot. Every step was a memory, scraped raw. The hall had new wallpaper. The family photos were gone, replaced by glossy canvases of abstract art and oversized clocks that didn't tell time so much as mock it, and the piano was truly gone, not just missing, but forgotten. The space where it once sat now held a marble sculpture of hands reaching toward nothing. I reached his study door, paused, knocked. "Come in," came his voice, tired, impersonal, like a doctor calling the next patient. The room hadn't changed as much. His books still lined the walls. The mahogany desk still gleamed under the light, and he still wore that navy cashmere sweater that made him look like someone you'd trust without question. He didn't look up. "You found the letter then?" "9. Hello. Not how are you. Not even I'm sorry. Just confirmation." I nodded, then realized he wasn't watching, and said, "Yes." He sighed, closing the leather-bound journal in front of him. "I wanted to tell you in person, but Elise thought it would be easier this way." I blinked. Easier for who? That made him look up. His eyes, once so full of warmth, were dull now, clouded, like a pond long forgotten. "Olivia, you've been drifting for years. You chose not to go back to school. You stayed here doing errands, playing big sister. But the truth is, you've never really built anything of your own." I felt the words slice, clean and deliberate. "I stayed because you asked me to." My voice cracked. "You said we'd build something together. You said you needed me." I needed help at the time. Yes. But things have changed. My sons, they're children. I cut in, my fingers curling into fists. They don't even know how to ride a bike without training wheels. He stood then, slowly, like a man about to deliver a eulogy. This legacy, this house, the firm, the investments, it needs to go to someone who can carry it forward. And that's not me, I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't blink. "You had your time, Olivia. You had your time." He might as well have said, "You had your turn at love, and now we're closing the book." He reached into the drawer and pulled out an envelope, thick, heavy, branded. "This is yours. Consider it a thank you for everything." He placed it on the table like a final nail in the coffin of my childhood. I didn't touch it. I didn't come for money. He smiled, not cruelly, but with the weary amusement of someone who'd long since given up expecting anything else. "I know," he said. "That's part of the problem. I don't remember walking to my car. I don't remember Elise watching from the upstairs window like a statue of judgment. I only remember the ache behind my eyes and the weight in my chest, as if my ribs were collapsing inward. I drove blindly, through familiar roads that blurred into one another, past the cafe where my mother used to read novels on rainy days, past the bookstore where I bought her a Mother's Day card I never gave her. When the nausea hit, I pulled over onto a gravel shoulder and stumbled out. I vomited onto the dirt, my body convulsing with something deeper than sickness. It wasn't just the will or the check. It was the fact that I had spent half my life trying to matter to a man who had already decided I didn't. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve and sat on the curb, trembling. The sun had dipped behind clouds, and everything felt like the edge of something, the edge of a breakdown, the edge of a truth too big to swallow. I pressed my forehead to my knees and whispered, "You were supposed to love me." It didn't echo. It didn't bounce back. It just sat there. A soft, useless truth in the dirt. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I opened my eyes again, I was parked in front of my mother's house. Peeling paint, rusted gates, wind chimes tangled in silence. And yet somehow it felt like the only place left that hadn't tried to rewrite me. I walked up the steps, my limbs leaden, and pushed the door open. It creaked, just like it always had. My mother was at the kitchen table, an old teacup cradled between her hands, reading a book with cracked binding. She looked up, and in her eyes, I saw what I'd been searching for everywhere else. Not pity, not judgment, just recognition. Without a word, I broke. The tears came before I could stop them. Huge, heaving sobs that tore through me like thunder. I sank to the floor beside her chair, clutching her legs like I was 5 years old again. She set the cup down and pulled me into her arms. "My girl," she whispered, rocking me gently. "My brave, brave girl." And in her warmth, in her old lavender-scented robe, in the chipped teacup and the threadbare rug beneath us, something small flickered to life inside me. Not revenge, not yet, just the faintest memory of who I used to be, before I tried so hard to be enough for someone who never deserved it. Maybe it wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the first chapter I'd ever get to write for myself. The house smelled like old lavender and dust, and something else. Something warm, like safety, left too long in the sun. At first, it didn't feel like anything. Not home, not shelter, just a place to land. A pause in the wreckage. My mother didn't ask many questions. She poured me tea. She gave me the room I once used to sleep in during holidays. The one with the creaky floorboard and the faded mural of stars above the bed. We didn't talk much that first week. Words were too loud. Grief made everything echo. Instead, I started scrubbing. The kitchen tiles, yellowed with time. The windows, smudged with years of weather. I pulled weeds from the garden until my hands blistered and bled. There was something strangely satisfying about dirt under my fingernails. It reminded me that I still existed. The roses in the backyard had gone wild, climbing over the trellis like they owned the place. I didn't cut them back. I liked the rebellion in their tangled petals. At night I journaled. Just a few lines. Sometimes a memory, sometimes a question. When did I start asking for so little? Or what do people do when they aren't trying to prove their worth? There were no answers, not yet, but the questions felt honest. One afternoon, as we sorted through old boxes in the attic, my mother pulled out a small, rusted metal case. She held it like it was heavier than it looked. "I was saving this," she said, voice soft but steady. "In case there came a day When you needed to remember that none of this was ever your fault, she handed it to me. The lock was broken, rusted through. I opened it with a flathead screwdriver. Inside were letters, some yellowing at the edges, others still sharp and folded. There were deeds, receipts, photographs from before the divorce. Before everything cracked in half and tucked between them was a slim folder labeled Trust Documents, Secondary Addendum. I skimmed through the fine print, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My father had forgotten something, a clause buried in the original trust that had never been updated after the divorce. One that stated that if any direct descendant contested the will within a specified window, all secondary beneficiaries would be frozen out until resolution. He hadn't revoked it. Probably thought no one would ever look. I looked up at my mother. Her eyes were already on me. "You were going to let it all go," I said. "I was. But they've taken too much from you, Liv. You deserve your name back." Filing the case was quiet. No screaming courtroom. No TV drama. Just papers, printed and notarized. A calm, competent lawyer named Miss Harris, who wore navy suits and didn't flinch when I explained what had happened. "You have a strong case," she said, "and if we do this right, they'll never see it coming." That night, I stood in the overgrown garden under a canopy of stars, the roses climbing wild beside me, and felt, for the first time in weeks, a stillness that didn't feel like grief. It felt like strategy, like reclamation to fill the long hours. I took a part-time job at a legal aid office downtown. It wasn't glamorous, mostly intake forms and coffee runs, but I didn't mind. The rhythm was what I needed. I watched women come in with bruises under their sunglasses and quiet fear behind their smiles. Some left stronger, others not yet, but I began to understand something. Sometimes surviving is an act of rebellion. Sometimes rebuilding begins with showing up. Even when no one is watching, the women there called me Ms. O. They liked my calm voice. I didn't tell them why my hands shook when I held a pen some days. I didn't tell them about the house with the piano that no longer had a place for me. But I saw them, and maybe, in some way, they saw me too. My mother and I learned to talk again, slowly, like people who once spoke the same language and were relearning the sounds. One night over pasta, she asked, "Do you hate him?" I paused. "No," I said. "I just finally stopped trying to make him choose me." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were always too loyal for your own good. I just thought if I was good enough, he'd remember. You were never the problem, Olivia. He just loved a version of control that couldn't survive you growing up." I didn't cry that time. I just nodded. It was the closest thing to a benediction I'd ever heard. I started cooking again. Nothing fancy. Soups, roasted vegetables, the occasional attempt at sourdough. But there was something powerful about feeding myself, nourishing something I'd long neglected. I wrote more in my journal. I'm learning the difference between silence and peace. Some roots grow stronger when the soil is poor. You don't have to be chosen to belong. I framed that last one, hung it over the sink. The house still creaked at night. The heater rattled. the paint peeled in stubborn corners. But it was real, honest. There was no pretending here. No performance, just a woman and her mother drinking tea in chipped mugs, listening to rain on the roof, and a wild garden outside, refusing to be tamed. Justice doesn't come with thunder. It comes in manila folders and late-night emails, in courtroom transcripts, and hushed conversations at the edge of strategy. It begins, in my case, with a woman named Farah Halim, 62, brilliant, always wearing matte lipstick in dark red. She didn't ask me to tell her everything at once. She just pushed her glasses up her nose, glanced at the truss loophole I handed her, and said, "This will do." She became the first mentor I didn't have to perform for. Working beside her was like learning to see in a new language. Contracts, timelines, asset flows, the things I once skimmed out of fear, I now studied with reverence. And as we dug into my father's empire, the one I once admired from the margins, we found fractures he never thought anyone would notice. Financial inconsistencies, gaps in the trust accounting, transfers of my college fund to shell accounts under my stepmother's name. I stopped shaking when I read the numbers. I stopped crying at signatures. Farah once said, "The law isn't emotionless, Olivia. It's emotion held accountable." I underlined that in my journal. At night, I studied again. Not just for the case, but for myself. I downloaded Open Legal, courses, bought used textbooks, read until my eyes burned. I remembered the version of me, 18 and eager, who once dreamed of becoming a lawyer before everything fractured, before I traded ambition for approval. Now the dream had shape again, not to prove anything, not even to fight, but because I could, because I had survived. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at the girl with long, careful hair, the one who once believed obedience could save her, and I cut it, clean and short, just below my chin. My mother gasped when she saw me. "You look older," she said. "I feel real." That same afternoon, I walked into a small shop downtown and bought myself a ring, thin gold, simple. I slid it onto my middle finger. No diamonds, no inscriptions, just metal and meaning. It was the first ring I'd ever worn that wasn't tied to someone else. When I got home, I opened a box of my childhood keepsakes. Concert tickets, dried flowers, a ribbon my father gave me when I got my first A in math. I held it all without weeping. Then I lit a candle and said goodbye to the girl who collected them, like proof she was worth loving. As the court date approached, Farah offered updates, calmly, methodically. The case was strong. The evidence was irrefutable. The opposing side, my father's legal team, sent a proposed settlement. It came with a thick packet, embossed with gold, and an offer large enough to buy silence. I read it once, then again. I didn't even feel tempted. I slid the packet back across the table. "No." Farah nodded. "Good." They wanted me quiet. I wanted truth. 2 weeks before trial, I drove past the old family estate. It was early evening, and the sky was the color of bruised silk. The house glowed, all lit up for one of their garden parties. Music drifting from the terrace. I parked across the street and stayed in the car. From here, I could see the top window of what used to be my bedroom. It was painted a soft blue now. A child's curtain hung in place of the lace I once chose with my mother. I saw the shadow of a small girl dart across the room. My half-sister, probably. She didn't know my name. Or maybe she did, in the abstract. The older one, the first one. A cautionary tale her mother whispered when the doors were closed. I didn't ache. I didn't envy. I only saw what was true. The house may no longer hold my scent, my laughter, my photographs. But it was still built with me in its foundation. That window was once mine. The staircase, the banister, the rose bush I planted when I was 10. No amount of repainting could change the bones beneath the skin. The night before trial, I didn't sleep much. I walked through my mother's garden in the dark, barefoot, the damp soil cool beneath my feet. The wild roses brushed against my legs like old friends. The stars looked different now. Not like wishes, but like markers of time. I whispered a promise into the wind. I will not beg for a place in my own story again. In the courtroom I wore black, not to mourn, but to anchor. Farah stood beside me, her presence calm and sharp. My father arrived late. He looked older, not frail, but tired. His new wife sat beside him. Flawless as ever, dressed like she was attending a luncheon, not a reckoning. They avoided my eyes. I didn't force contact. The proceedings began with dry protocol. Then documents, testimonies, my financial statements, the trust addendum, the redirection of college funds, emails from the firm that showed subtle but unmistakable fraud. The judge listened. I spoke once, not about money, but about erasure. I'm not here out of bitterness, I said. I'm here because I was written out of my own story while I was still breathing. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. And in that sterile courtroom, for the first time in years, I felt seen. We adjourned that day, with the promise of a ruling to come. Farah was confident. I didn't ask for guarantees. I'd already won something I couldn't lose again, myself. On the way home, I stopped at a diner, ate pie alone, wrote in my journal, "This is what power feels like. Not thunder, but quiet certainty." Courtrooms are not made for poetry. They're made of worn wood and fluorescent light, of murmured objections and the shuffle of papers that determine fates. Still, there is a strange kind of elegance to them, not in beauty, but in structure, in the idea that truth, when laid bare, has weight. I sat on the left side of the courtroom, hands folded in my lap. My name echoed across the walls as the clerk read it. For the first time in years, it didn't sound foreign. I didn't glance at my father, not at first, but I felt his presence, like a shadow stretching across my childhood. He sat across from me, older, stiffer, his posture pulled tight like a suit too small. His eyes never met mine, not when the judge entered, not when Farah stood to speak, not even when the evidence was presented. Document after document, like dominoes falling in orderly lines. Trust amendments, forged authorizations, emails where my future was siphoned away. I watched him flinch only once, when Farah read aloud a letter he had written to the trustees, calling me unmoored, emotional, no longer fit to carry the family name. The words landed, soft as snow, but cold as knives. I didn't flinch. I'd already lived those sentences in silence. When it was my turn to testify, I rose, not with drama, but with weight. The oath was short, the seat was hard, the microphone buzzed faintly. I spoke slowly, not to dramatize, but to respect the truth. I'm not here because of the money, I said. The judge blinked. A pen scratched somewhere behind me. I'm here because I was erased. I told my story, not with tears, but with the grace of someone who'd already grieved. I spoke of my mother's exile, my own quiet sacrifices, the years I stayed loyal to a man who praised me only in the past tense. I believed love could be earned, that if I played the part long enough, I'd be seen again. I was wrong, but that doesn't mean I deserve to be rewritten. Farah placed one final document on the table, a letter I wrote when I was 17, never sent. In it, I begged him to come to my graduation, promising I'd sit in the back if he didn't want to be seen with me. He never replied. The judge read the first lines and looked up, not with pity, with clarity. When he delivered the ruling, the words were precise. In the matter of the trust and estate, the court finds in favor of Olivia May Hart. A gavel fell. My name, all three parts of it, was back. My father didn't speak, not a word. My stepmother gathered her purse in sharp movements, storming out as though the walls themselves had betrayed her. And then he stood. I watched him hesitate at the door, hand on the handle, head turned just slightly, enough for his profile to soften. He looked at me just once, and in that split second, I saw something flicker. Not love, not even sorrow, just recognition, as if he finally saw the grown woman where the obedient daughter once stood. The version of me he could no longer control. Then he left, and I let him. Days later, I received the final paperwork, the ink still fresh. The estate, legally split. My name restored in the trust, my childhood no longer severed from its records. It felt strange, holding the legal title in my hands. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just right. I didn't rush to the estate. I waited until the rain stopped. The gate groaned when I pushed it open. The rose bushes had been trimmed back, their wildness tamed. The stones on the path were clean, but I still knew where they cracked. I tripped over them as a child chasing fireflies. The front door was unlocked. No one was home. My half-siblings were likely at school. The stepmother had retreated, according to Farah. My father had left for a retreat, as if one could meditate away a legacy of neglect. The silence inside was thick, almost holy. I didn't roam like an intruder. I moved like someone coming home after a long exile. Reverent, slow, deliberate. Each room held echoes. The dining table, where I once set plates too big for my hands. The piano with its sticky G key. The hallway where I'd hidden after overhearing the word custodies. But I wasn't here for those rooms. I walked to the back of the house, to the farthest hallway, where dust still clung to the molding. This nursery, once mine, later used for storage. Eventually forgotten. The door creaked as I opened it. The wallpaper was faded. Soft moons and rabbits that once made me giggle in the dark. A mobile hung crooked from the ceiling. There was no furniture, just light streaming in through half-closed blinds and the soft hush of time. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a small silver frame. Inside, a photo of me at 3 years old, smiling, gap-toothed, wearing a paper crown. I placed it gently on the empty shelf, not to claim the house, but to honor the girl they tried to erase. I didn't linger. I left without taking anything. Not a spoon, not a book, not even a stone from the garden. My victory wasn't in possession. It was in memory made visible again. As I stepped outside, the wind caught my hair, lifting it like a flag. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I had returned. Back at my mother's house, the porch light was already on. She met me at the door, eyes gentle, tea ready, no questions, no victory speeches, just a seat beside her on the couch, and quiet breathing between us. I leaned into her shoulder and whispered. He looked at me, just once, and, she asked. That was enough. We sat like that as the sun set. Two women who had once been cast aside, now whole. In my journal that night, I wrote, I didn't go back for revenge. I went back for the girl I was, to tell her she mattered, to prove she was never disposable, to show her we survived, and then I let go.